Hi, I'm Des Birkinshaw,
And I'm Mark Hooper.
and this is Without the Beatles. So, Without the Beatles is a new podcast with a video element, and the idea is that we went around the world talking to famous musicians, artists, writers, all kinds of people, to ask them what it is in their life wouldn't have happened if it hadn't been for the Beatles. Without the Beatles, what would you have been? And it's been very interesting because we've been all over the place, spoken to some really big names. And it's been a 10-year project. So some of the people have since passed away. So we have some of the last interviews with some really amazing people. And I'm really looking forward to showing you some of those, including today's.
Yeah, so we've got a bit of a, I was going to say living legend, not anymore, but a national icon, Lemmy.
What did you think when you first was asked about doing this Without the Beatles project? What was your thoughts about that?
There's been a lot of podcasts about the Beatles, and people focus on the music and the musicianship and the writing, and which is all, we're both fascinated by that. But I think so much has been said, and what isn't covered so much is culturally. And I think it's fascinating. People, someone like Lemmy, who grew up, knew what life was like before the Beatles, without the Beatles, and they saw the impact they had and the change it had for everybody. And if you came after that, you're kind of aware of everything and how important it was, but it's quite hard to understand actually how much daily life changed and how much impacts to everything, that English life, but globally as well, how much everything changed.
Yes, we do go into that quite a lot over the things. But I've got to say, I've got a real thing about podcasts. That whole thing of like, can you subscribe? It would really help my channel. We don't do that. We will do it, but we'll do it at the end where it's supposed to be. So we're going to go straight in. Our first episode is with the late, great Lemmy Kilmister. We're going to do that in 2 parts.
Enjoy. Here he is, Lemmy.
So the question I do have to ask you is, can you actually imagine a world without the Beatles?
Not now, no. I mean, I remember a world without the Beatles, but it wasn't as good as after there was the Beatles. Yeah, I mean, the Beatles were, you had to be there, otherwise you'd just never understand it. I mean, the Beatles ruled everything at the time. There was even a page of the Daily Mirror which was just about what the Beatles did that day, That's pretty big. And when George died, the Household Cavalry Band at the Changing of the Guard played a medley of George Harrison songs, which is also fucking big,
What do you think it is then? What's that special thing?
It's magic. It's the nearest thing you've got to real magic. Those 4 guys on, together were magic. Alone they weren't, George came the closest with that, All Things Must Pass. That was very much like a Beatles album. But none of the others even came close to their achievements as a group,
It's an odd thing, isn't it? Because the stars really have to be aligned, don't they, to get that kind of combination?
Absolutely.
Would you dare to put your finger on it? What is that magic then?
No, you can't analyse these things, because if you analyse them, you ruin them. It's better that it stays magic and abstract, There's another band, there's the original Stones had that, but then Brian left and it was never the same again.
So one of the things I'm obviously interested in is the fact that you grew up in the north, didn't you? And what impact was that? Did you feel the regional impact they had when you were young?
Oh, yeah, it was always the Beatles against the Stones, Before that, it wasn't particularly. Everything came from London, as far as we knew. Of course, Billy Fury was from Liverpool, but we didn't know that then, And people came from all kinds of places. I think Duffy Power was from Liverpool as well, wasn't he? I don't know where Vince Eager was from, probably Great Yarmouth or something.
So what was the impact at the time? Because you were lucky enough, I think, I read somewhere years ago, that you saw them at the Cavern, didn't you?
Yeah, well, we used to get all these chicks came down to, because I lived in a holiday resort, so you get different girls would come down certain weeks. So you plan your summer ahead, And these 4 girls from Liverpool used to come down every year, and it was all Billy Fury. Oh, isn't he gorgeous, and all that. And then one year they came down and Billy Fury was gone. And it was Beatles, 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 And they even wrote a thing on my wall in the rec room I had in the garage, a drawing of a Beatle. It said Beatle Game, BEA, and I didn't know who they were, so I went up to Liverpool. Because I really fancied one of these birds anyway. It was 2 birds with 1 stone, So I went up to see her and she took me down to the Cavern. And I saw the Beatles about 3 times up there, I think. And then I saw them again in Llandud and Odeon when they got big, you know. Same place I saw Billy Fury, actually. And then I saw them again in Rill. I don't know what the venue was. It was like a big pub, you know. And then they were gone into the stratosphere after that, you know.
These things get mythologized a lot, but you were there. But was it tangibly exciting to be in the Cavern? What's your memories of it?
The Cavern, there wasn't much fighting going on in the Cavern because there was no alcohol down there, you know. It was just coffee and cokes and things, you know. And most places were then, you know. The thing where a boozer would put on bands didn't come so much later, you know. It was like there was the pub and there was the coffee bar, and the coffee bar had the band, you know. And we used to, it was just, you'd have like 7 bands a night at the Cavern. It was really good, you know. A lot of really good bands up there then.
What's your specific memory of seeing the Beatles as a live unit? Were they any good? What was that?
They were excellent, yeah. I mean, later on you couldn't tell what they were doing because of the screams, you know, like, but they were really a good band. At the Cavern, they were great, you know. Eating sausage rolls in between songs, singing with your mouth full, you know. Like,
Eric Stewart said to me from Tennessee, he was saying he saw them at one of their...
well, he was in Wayne Fontana then.
He was, yeah. He saw them doing a BBC audition, and when he saw them, he says, you know, we look like a right bunch of twats come down from Manchester. We've got Motorhead suits on, and they all dressed in leather, and it was a bit scary, to be honest. That was what he remembers about them.
You see, the funny thing is that the Stones got the reputation as being the hard men, and the Beatles got the reputation of being like smarmy, you know, but it was the other way around, in fact. Like the Stones were just dressing up. You know, the Beatles were from Liverpool, man, you know, it's a pretty tough place, you know.
I've always thought that was pretty odd, but that's the Keith Richards thing, isn't it? Hard drinking later on and beer as well.
Well, they were just dressing up, really, you know, like dressing up as bad guys, you know, like weekend ravers, you know. But then, of course, they grew into it, you know, and they became bad guys in the end. But it took a while. I mean, Jagger was never a bad guy, you know, he was always too much establishment, you know.
What impact did it have on you at the time? Did it do anything then? Seeing them as a band, did that move you along?
Oh, yeah. I mean, they were the first band to write their own songs in Britain. We were always doing covers before that of American stuff. They were the first band to all play and all sing. You know, it was always somebody and the somethings before, you know. So that was unique as well. And when they covered something, they usually did it better than the original, which is a real change, you know, because most covers are lame, you know, before and after them. But I mean, if you hear them do, you really got a hold on me from the first album, you know.
The other thing is, if you hear them at the Star Club tapes or that kind of thing, they're actually really, really aggressive. Yeah. It's really punk, isn't it? But I suppose that's like the speed punk, and all that kind of thing.
Because they used to have to do 3 3/4 hour sets in them places, you know. And in the end, you go nuts, you know. I mean, I've been in bands that did that around that time. And you run out of songs, you know, because at the time, all the bands played the same 10 songs. You know, Fortune Teller, you know, Some Other Guy, you know, all the Scouse bands did the same 10 songs. But having said that, they all did them different. You know, like the Big Three were a great favourite of mine too, you know, from Liverpool. And the Mersey Beats were huge, you know, in Liverpool, I mean. The Searchers, they were a great band too.
You've heard the Beatles, you know, you're all fired up, but you were roadieing, weren't you, by the late mid-60s, weren't you?
Yeah, I started with Little Richard and Elvis and Cliff Richard, you know, because Cliff Richard was great then, you know. I mean, he's terrible now, you know, we all know that, but he was great then. His thing was he never smiled. That was his gimmick. Imagine Cliff Richard. All he does is smile now. It's and he was like the moody one, you know, and Billy Fury, he was very good too. But then the Beatles turned it all on its head, you know, they just turned it around. And I mean, the hysteria that accompanied it. I mean, within 3 months of the first record coming out, they couldn't go out the house. You know, literally couldn't go out the house.
That must have been quite, I mean, you know, at that age, I remember going to see The Jam as my first gig, right? And that made me want to play guitar and stuff because it was partly the reaction of the crowd that did it as much as that, as what was happening on stage, you know? Did it have an impact on you seeing all those girls screaming at people?
Sure, you know, I mean, it reinforced my conviction that that was the job for me, you know, like. First I saw him cling to Billy Fury and then I saw him cling to Ringo, you know, I mean, it was great. I thought if that guy with that nose can get laid that easy, so can I, you know.
I think every teenage boy does that. It's half the motivation, isn't it? That's why
Yeah.
you write so much when you're like 16 to 22,
course.
because you're dick writing it more than anything else.
Yeah, led by the dick. Yeah, right.
So one of the things is, because you were roading for Jimi Hendrix and people like that, there's the famous story about Jimmy playing Sergeant Pepper after it came out. Were you working for him then, or was...
No, that was at the Savile. That was just before I got down there. I think that was 67, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah,
I wasn't down there till late 67, so I was down there for the tour in September, I think, and he did that in like June or July. Yeah, he did it the night after it came out, yeah, because he had an advanced copy, obviously, you know.
Do you think what's the connection between what the Beatles are doing in terms of music and the inventiveness of what they were doing and the development of later music? There's not an obvious connection between Jimi Hendrix and the Beatles, but
There was with Oasis, though.
on the other hand, the way that I always thought, and is what strikes me, is that what you suddenly get is this focus on music, and that means the doors are open for other people to do their thing.
Just for the love of it.
Just
you
for
know.
the love of it.
Yeah.
Do you experience that? Did you feel that? I mean,
Yeah,
for me,
of
the great
course.
explosion is, I like the rock and roll music of the 50s, but it's not as good as what happened in the 60s for
Well,
me.
it was as good. It was just the 60s were so different that it negated everything that came before it for a while. Then that stuff crept back in, you know, and got respected again. But like, they were like the new broom sweeps clean, you know. I mean, it just went whoosh, and you forgot about everything else. You know, it was just like Liverpool, you know. And it happened again in Seattle, you know, with the Nirvana, right? They went up and signed everything with a guitar around its neck in Seattle. They did that in Liverpool, you know. I mean, there was Oriole Records in Liverpool. They got everybody unsigned and got them to play in this ballroom and recorded them all. And I think they got 30 bands on 2 double albums. Right? And some of it was great, you know, Earl Preston and the TTs and all kinds of people that you never heard of again.
Yeah, one of the things Eric Stewart said was he got signed because they were in Manchester, and they got on the back of that with A&Rs coming out saying, you know, because when you think about it, if I hadn't done that, I wouldn't have met my wife, wouldn't have had my kids, I wouldn't have had formed 10cc, but then I nearly got killed in a car crash. He crashed his Ferrari. And he goes, obviously, I wouldn't have been driving the Ferrari if I hadn't been a successful musician. So what I mean is, it's kind of horrible.
He wouldn't have made the money that he bought the Ferrari with, would he?
If you ever thought, when you're looking at your own life, where do you figure the Beatles in it in terms of their importance of how they impacted on you? What influence had you on you musically, but more importantly, about your attitudes and what made you want to do with your life?
I always would say the Beatles were the best band for me ever. You know, because the songs they wrote, the clever vocals. I mean, they were amazing vocalists. You know, if you listen to this boy live on the Ed Sullivan Show, I mean, live, you know, I mean, it's unbelievable, right? And live at that Washington show too that they recorded, right? And if you watch that Washington show, they haven't even got roadies. I mean, Ringo's turned his own drums around, you know, and at one point they're playing with the amps facing away from them, so they can hear even less of what they're doing, and they're still perfect harmonies, you know, and they couldn't have heard anything on stage. And Shea Stadium, you know, same thing, and they're perfect, the vocals. Best band in the world, I think.
I'm not a bad guitarist. I can play, I can sing a bit. But I tell you, this boy is a really classic one because it sounds fine when you're singing along to the record. But you try and sing along, just playing the simple chords, it's hard to know where the melody is.
And then the 3 harmonies, you know.
It's difficult to know which one to sing. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. And nobody had ever done anything like that. Nobody had ever done anything like Yesterday. No 20-year-old man had ever written Yesterday before that, you know. I mean, that's a special talent, Paul, you know.
So as things move on through the 60s, did they keep their cachet? By the time you're working later on in rock, and rock becomes harder, could they compete on that level? Do you know what I mean? Did they keep it together from that point of view in terms of their success?
For me, they did, you know. I would say if you were growing up with the funk thing, people tended to dismiss them, you know, as being old. You know what I mean? That was the main sin, being old. You know, that's always been the same with rock and roll, you know. I managed to get away with it. I'm sure the Beatles would have got away with it if they reformed. People would have gone in their millions to see it.
I'll tell you a strange thing though. When George Harrison did his last gig, he did a gig at the Albert Hall. It was fantastic for the Natural Law Party, pre-internet, 92 or something. And I thought, well, I'm not that bothered actually. And then 2 days later, I changed my mind, but I still got tickets in the stalls. Now you can imagine, George doing a one-off gig at the Albert Hall. something has happened with their reputation in the last 15, 20 years.
Yeah.
Because
Well, people have realised what great songs they wrote. You know, I mean, if you play guitar and you play along to like "If I Fell," you know, I mean, all them minors, the clever use of minors, you know, because they were the first band to do that too. You know, like go from a minor to a major and make it, and the vocal went somewhere else. You know, they were genius. You know, and they didn't even know it. You know, which was the best thing about it.
well, it was also intense, wasn't it? When you look at the amount of output they come up with in 6.5 years,
know.
it's absolutely
Ridiculous, you know. But we did 2 albums in 1978. You know, Motorhead. You know, I mean, you can do that, but ours weren't as good as theirs. You know,
On the other hand,
mind you, we didn't have George Martin producing them either.
it was probably a hardcore year, though. You know, you must have been drained by the end of it.
Yeah, but he was the sixth Beatle for sure. Fifth Beatle, I mean, George Harrison, George Martin. I mean, without him, they wouldn't have had the access to all them classical instruments they used. And he played the harmonium solo on "In My Life," you know, and stuff like that, and sped it up, you know. And he was like really innovative as far as recording was concerned, because Lennon would never have got to do "Strawberry Fields" without George Martin being there to show him how to do it, you know, to get all them backwards tracks in sync. I mean, if you read his book, George Martin, about the recording of all those albums, it's unbelievable the things they did. They had 3 recording machines on 3 floors of Abbey Road, all wired into Jeff Emmerich running up and downstairs, plugging things in, snakes of cables in the middle of the night, you know.
Yeah, I was just over at Mark Knopfler's studio in British Grove in Chiswick.
Who's this? Sorry.
Mark Knopfler.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he's got the EMI TG desk used on Band on the Run and the last of the EMI 4-track red machines. So you can have the SSL or either of the old desks.
Right.
So 60s, 70s or 80s machines, you know, very interesting.
Right. I think those techniques were better myself, you know. I mean, it was early days of stereo, right? But you had to all play the song right. Or, you know, I mean, there's no overdubbing as such, you know.
Des, first of all, and what was it like to interview Lemmy? Because obviously he's not around anymore. He's a fascinating character.
yeah, it was fantastic actually, because we were in this hotel in Kensington, and first thing he did was like, "Can you get me a JD and Coke?" You know, and then it was like, do you mind if I smoke? And I was going, "Not really, no, fine, get on with it."
Is what you
And
want.
yeah, that's what you want from Lemmy, I suppose, in a way. But also, he was so passionate about the subject.
I mean, you can hear, like, you know, we've got to say at the beginning, he's really coffee and got guts. I remember when I first was this, oh my God, but he kind of got into the flow of being Lemmy, didn't he? But it's like, well, you know, you can kind of see he was a bit, you know, sadly he's not with us, but you can kind of see why in a way, because
Yeah. I mean, he was interesting, and he was really passionate, as you can tell, you know. And I think the fact that he was a regular at the Cavern was really fascinating.
Yeah.
And actually, there are lots of witnesses to that, but there's something about his eyewitness statement I really love, because he was a rock star himself.
yeah. And
So when he's saying they're a brilliant band, you know, I believe it.
exactly.
You know?
Yeah. I mean, Lemmy doesn't sugarcoat anything. Lemmy's Lemmy, and I love the fact that, you know, there's this sort of persona people think about, and he's like kind of gruff, and he doesn't like suffer fools gladly, but you know, he's really passionate, and I just love the fact that, like, you know, it doesn't care about like what it looks like to anybody else. Like, I love the Beatles; they're amazing, they're an amazing band, and it may not be like the most punk thing to do or rock and roll thing to do, but it's like, I don't care, they're an amazing band. I think that's the thing. What he was saying is like, first and foremost, they're a brilliant band.
Yes, and straight after that, by the way, it's obviously there's no need for me to put it on here. I was asked if it was Ozzy Osbourne's birthday. And Lemmy says, "Do you mind could you record a video message for Ozzy?" So he did, and Ozzy is the other one whose life was turned on its head by the Beatles, and all those people were, and the heavy metal kids and the new metal kids, they're part of a lineage, and one of the things we'll be exploring over time, of course, is trying to make people aware of that lineage. You know, the step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. So even if you absolutely hate everything the Beatles stand for, I'm afraid you're in their world, whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
You know,
and I think there's this sort of narrative. A lot of those bands came after the Beatles to kind of bury that, and then, you know, get their sort of classical about phony Beatlemania. But the thing I loved about Lemmy was he was saying, like, first and foremost, they were like a really hard rocking band, and they toured and rehearsed so brilliantly. Like, by the time they came to record, they were ahead of anybody else.
yeah. Glenn Matlock was famously thrown out of the Sex Pistols for liking Paul McCartney. Is that right? I think that's what I read.
I think he was playing a Beatles based on this story about.
The influence of the Beatles you'll see often throughout this series, but one of the things we thought would be interesting is it's great to have all these incredibly famous people, but people like, you'll discover Mark and I stories as we go. But, you know, people like Mark and I definitely owe a lot to the Beatles. And so we started trying to find people with more normal jobs to discuss with them, you know, how did the Beatles impact you? And we started with a cracker.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's a normal job.
It's not a normal job, is it?
Yeah, Paul Mannion, brilliant.
He's in the weird position of having played John and George,
Yeah.
across the world. Let's just introduce him.
Yeah. So here he is, Paul Mannion.
Yeah, it's first time here. It's fantastic. Yeah. Five year place. I wasn't expecting it to be this big. The gardens, great. It'd be great to have a festival of Liverpool bands, Liverpool acts playing here.
I used to, when I was at music college when I was 19, a friend of mine lived just up the road, and we'd wait for these people to come off the Magical Mystery Tour bus who were the tourists, and we'd run down with our acoustic guitars and meet them outside the house and then just start playing. And his little brother would come round with a hat, with a cap, and take the money off people. And then one day the lady who used to live there before the National Trust came out, and she shouted at us, said, "I don't want this outside my house anymore." And so we stopped then, but it was a good experience.
So is that when you kind of, did you sort of have kind of ambitions to do that as a career already then?
Yeah, well, the Beatles influenced me into writing songs. As soon as I started playing the guitar, as soon as I started learning a couple of chords, I started writing songs.
My mum went to see the Beatles in 1964 at the Empire down in Bleasdale. She said all she could hear was girls screaming, not the band. And she loved the Beatles. And I doubt I would have picked up the guitar and gone to music college, studied for a couple of years, and I doubt I would have wanted to be a songwriter or playing bands.
I went to the same school that John Lennon went to, Corey Bank, which was called Cobblestones when I went there. Yeah. And then eventually I ended up in a show in the West End for 5 years, playing George and then playing John Lennon on tour.
Yeah. Well, isn't that amazing the way they sort of incorporate, you know, it's like folk music and folk history into the...
Yeah, I think there's a lot of Irish influence as well.
People talk about how, like, you know, how revolutionary it was, but there's always something in it that people can relate to. You know, like older generations can still hear, like,
definitely, yeah.
The thing about it, it's like such a sort of unprepossessing house, isn't it? You could easily walk past this, but there wasn't a National Trust plaque on the front.
I think it was a council house, I'm sure it was. But yeah, the amount of classic songs that they started writing in there and in the backyard. I wonder if they ever had any complaints from the neighbours.
Yeah, exactly.
Because they, as you said, they would go into the toilet, wouldn't they, and rehearse in the toilet for that echo, the bog echo.
So we're coming up to the Everyman. What did you?
Yeah, I worked with a theatre company. My first job in theatre, I worked with a theatre company called Caboodle. We had our offices next to the Everyman. It shows the Everyman on the Unity Theatre down the road.
So is that like musical theatre?
Yeah, musical theatre. Called Caboodle. We did kind of Brechtian type theatre. It was a great experience. Yeah. I've never worked in theatre before. The first time I acted on stage. Yeah. Extremely nervous the first time I ever did it, but great experience. Yeah, so I did a show at the Royal Court called Lennon, where I played George Harrison. That was an actor muso show where we played all different instruments on stage and different characters, and that was a great experience.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And sort of having done something like that, do you then, getting on to Let It Be, did you become known as, like, he can do a good George Harrison?
Kind of typecast.
Yeah.
That's where McCartney played in it at the in that James Cook thing.
When they end up, that's brilliant.
I did a show called Lennon with that fella, Andrew Schofield, played John Lennon. Great actor, great musician. I played George Harrison.
So how's it like being back here, having been in London for, 20 years?
Yeah, well, about 17 years. So, being back here now, there's so much more live music in Liverpool now. There's live music around Matthew Street from around midday up until midnight every day. Yeah. And there's loads of tourists coming in and out. So it's great for the young and, just jobbing musicians, singers, guitarists.
So as you can see, it's just rocking every night in Liverpool now, full of tourists.
You must have met some pretty amazing people through that.
I met quite a few. I toured with Elvis Costello, one of the first major tour I did. And last they put a statue of Brian Epstein up. It was Brian Epstein and his business since we wouldn't have the Beatles. That was the old shop where that lad went in and asked for my Bonnie.
You've got a new album coming out soon.
Yeah, well, that's it. It's going to be an EP first, and then we're going to develop it into an album. So I've got a single coming out in a few weeks towards the end of August called Chaser. The band's called The Word. Yeah, I don't know what my life would be like. It would be less rich. I know that. I wouldn't have travelled the way I've travelled. I've travelled all over the world a couple of times, you know. Worked in the West End, worked all over the place, you know, down to the Beatles, really. Thank them.
Whatever was happening interesting culturally, they were kind of the door to that as well, I think. They kind of, the stuff that they were influenced by, they kind of then introduced to like these small little worlds that then they sort of made bigger by introducing.
Always teaching you something, always giving you some kind of, you know, positive worldview. So that's going to be at Airbnb soon. So Beatle fans from all over the world will be able to come and stay here and come and see me do my shows. The band's called The Word. Shameless plug. You know, and being from the same school and from the same area, you just couldn't escape them, but I wouldn't want him.
Weird walking around Liverpool with him, wasn't it?
Yeah.
We went to the Casbah.
Yeah.
And you've never been, because I think a lot of Beatle fans don't realise the Casbah still exists.
Incredible place. And the fact that it's like unique and that it's completely untouched, it's almost like they've just shut up shop the day before, and you can see, you know, they let you touch everything. There's like the ceilings which they'd painted in different rooms, and you know, John's graffitied his name and got a smack round the ear. Look out for it.
Still owned by the Best family. So if you ever go to Liverpool, the Cavern is wonderful. But it is a recreation of the Cavern. It's on the wrong side of the street, and it's not the actual building. But the building where the Beatles basically came together as a band, where they first performed as the Beatles, and spent 2 years and decorated and put up, is the basement of Pete Best's house that Mona Best owned in Liverpool in Hayman's Green. And it's after the Pete Best was shut out of the Beatles, she basically shut the club, and everything was left preserved in aspic exactly as it was in 1962. It's quite mad, isn't it?
Yeah, and the thing that really struck me was like how tight the first, because they obviously had to go into another room because it was getting too popular, but the first space they recorded in, it's like, you know, it's like a tiny corridor, and there's doors either side, not at the back. So even to get in to watch, you could probably fit 10 people in that room to see, and everyone else would be craning their heads around the back and just imagining the sound there. And you know, there's not even enough room to like move your elbows, is there?
Well, that's how bands start out.
Yeah, exactly.
Playing in the corner. For various reasons, they don't like people to film inside the Casbah. But you should have seen Paul. You can get his enthusiasm from the film, right? And he's just so excited. So he wants to run a festival from there. He wants to play there. He wants to record there.
And it's in like an amazing area of Liverpool, and it's like it's very sort of middle class. It's a massive house.
Yeah, it's a massive house thing. If you ever go, you'll have to wonder of the chutzpah of Pete Best's mum for daring to run a nightclub in the basement of our house in basically what looks like the London equivalent would be Hampstead or something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So we better go back to Lemmy. Talking of people who were influenced by the Beatles, we'll talk about it afterwards. Lemmy Part 2.
So let's talk about you. It's really about the impact it had on you, I think. And
the first album was 12 hours.
Yeah, great vocals on there. Yeah. Actually, I was listening to a bootleg the other day. It was like live, and they started with Twist and Shout of all things, which I think was odd. You know, you think that would be at the end.
Yeah, because that's the end of the gig song, isn't it? You know,
absolutely. How would you categorize your own career? You know, give me 3 sentences, 3 lines that describe your career. You know,
top end of the second echelon. I'm quite happy to be there. We might be inching into the lower regions of the top echelon now, just in time for me to die. You know, like.
Well, that's the interesting thing about music. It's its own thing, but it's also how it influences other people. You know, you can't.
It's also how people see it, perceive it. You know, I mean, it's a funny thing. You can't predict it, else we'd all be rich. You know, because it's like Lennon said at that press conference. You know. What do you think the magic is that makes you guys so successful? He said, well, if we knew that, we'd give up and be managers, you know.
Yeah, everyone has that peak period when they're selling the most records and all that kind of thing. Well, I wonder, when you look back on it now, are you surprised, or what's your thought about how long you've managed to keep going? Was it a surprise to you? What's your own thoughts on that now?
Well, people say, how long did you think you'd be going for when you formed the band? And you don't think like that at all. You know, you're just playing. You know, you're just fooling around and having a laugh and trying to get the girls to show up, you know. And that's all you do for about the first 5 years, and then it gets serious. But it still isn't that serious. You know what I mean? It's rock and roll, for Christ's sake. You know, why should you try and project your fiscal, you know, the end of your fiscal year onto anything that's to do with music? Why should you do that? It just ruins it, you know.
What do you think about the state of the industry now? Someone was saying to me the other day, and I think it's really interesting, is that the Beatles change everything. They change the industry and make it that you've got to be a singer-songwriter. And that was true until fairly recently. And now you back to Svengali
Yeah.
running things, singing Tim
Exactly.
Panelli songs. It's a long influence, but it's a shame it's gone, isn't it?
Well, yeah, but I mean, the charts are always full of crap, you know. I mean, except for when the Beatles were in their heyday, and all them other bands that came up with them were also in their heyday, and that was a much more interesting chart than you've ever had before or since. It's always shit like, you know, remember Lieutenant Pigeon and all that rubbish, you know, and June and Julie or whatever their names were, you know, terrible stuff, you know. It's always top of the charts, you know. The charts is not a good indicator of what people are actually listening to. Never was, you know.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I was thinking that, you know, you're never going to have a Led Zeppelin or a Beatles again making billions of pounds, but there has
Right.
been a kind of democratization, right? So people can get stuff done and get it out.
I think it's very elitist now. I think it's getting more elitist every day, you know. It's like you are flavour of the month or you're not, you know, and that's even more prevalent now than it was.
But that's the top end, right? At the bottom end, I did a film about a folk singer, great folk singer called Catherine Williams. She set up her own label up and she makes 35 to 50K a year.
Yeah.
And she was able to tour, make albums. And that's quite
Yeah.
democratic, right? No label would have given
She
her a
does
shot.
what she likes and she manages to do it, you know, which is always laudable, you know. Good luck, you know. I wish her luck with that. I wish anybody like that can do it independent of the big labels, you know, because they were in control for far too long. And now they failed to keep up with what was going on and they like cut their own throats and they're too fucking stupid to even see it. You know, they're going to go down in a welter of confusion, you know.
Yeah, but things have changed, and I think you get people on. I'm really interested in the fact that singer-songwriters now on YouTube, whatever, owes a debt to the Beatles because, apart from the musical stuff, but
Yeah.
and writing it, but that business sense of running your own label. I'm sure a lot of bands now run their own labels, and you probably do yourself, right? Do you run your own label?
Forget the clothing store episode, all right? Go straight past that and go to like Madison Avenue.
It's not that different from what people do now. But there's a decent line in Motorhead t-shirts, isn't there?
Oh yeah, but I mean, we don't promote them as a fashion accessory, although they became one about 3 years ago, 4 years ago. All the models were wearing them, and they for about 6 weeks. That was quite funny.
Dave Grohl said you were the only legend he met that counts, you know. And I'm hoping that we get to interview Paul at some point during this series. I don't know whether we will or not. But it would be really interesting to ask him, you know, can you take on board the influence you've had, or do you just have to crack on with what you're doing? You know, it's a bit weird to examine your own legend, isn't it? But can you do it?
I'm just doing what I do, you know. I don't. Whenever anybody says, "Oh, you're an icon," you know, I just think it's funny, you know, because I never wanted to be an icon, you know. I just wanted to play and get heard and get laid, basically. I'm a really shallow entertainment level person like that, you know. Although I must admit, lately I've enjoyed it in the studio more the last 5, 6 albums than I used to. But all the same, the basic idea is still get up on stage and rock your head off, you know, and do the best you can, right? And nobody's eating chicken and chips while I'm on fucking stage. I'll tell you that. You know, that's why we play so loud.
You know, we saw you once at Guildfest.
Yeah,
It was a good gig, very loud, bit of a mixed crowd, you know.
that's all right. We get them. Either they stay or they leave. There's nowhere in between with Motorhead, you know. I mean, you either like us or you don't. Which is fine with me, you know. I mean, that's how it should be.
My 2-year-old was going nuts.
Good. Obviously, a person of distinction and good taste, yes.
Yeah, she was doing it with Imelda May as well. Doing a bit of rockabilly. Couldn't get her away, you know. If I tried to take her away, she was screaming.
Yeah, our rockabilly album, me and Slim Jim did.
I didn't know that.
That's 7 years ago, I think it was. We did an album, me and Slim Jim and Danny B. Harvey. Used to be in Levi and the Rock Hats, right? And we did an album, mainly Buddy Holly covers. Went down very well. So my side project is called Headcat.
He was a fucking good songwriter too, Buddy Holly.
Yeah,
Right?
he was.
He was. I was revisiting him this year
Him and
because
Eddie
of
Cochran were the first
because
good
of
guitar players too.
Eddie's a great thing. Did you ever see Eddie?
No, I was going to see him on the second half of his tour.
Back to the influence thing. You actually even changed the way I played bass. You know, before I
Yeah,
saw
yeah.
Motorhead, I never thought to ever use two notes at
Ah,
once.
chords, yeah, right.
Yeah.
And the drone string.
Yeah, chords.
So it's very handy for filling in behind the solo, you know.
Yeah. So of course it's very minor if someone like me says, "Oh, it changed the way I play bass." But can you give me any examples of the most extreme form of someone coming up to you and saying, "Look, you changed my life. You influenced me. You did something." Give me a flavour of that.
Well, we brought a kid out of a coma once. He had a motorbike accident and he skated 50 yards on the back of his head, and he was in this coma for about a year, you know. And it was quite fashionable at the time for bands to try and get kids out of comas. I mean, it was going on. There's about 6 or 7 bands did it, and we did about 6 tapes for 6 kids, but we only ever brought 1 kid out. That was pretty good, you know. Like we said, like tapes to saying things like a snatch of one of the songs, and then we'd say, "Hey, this is Lemmy, wake up, Paul," you know, whatever his name was, yeah. And this kid woke up, and I don't know if he would have woke up anyway.
Yeah.
But I thought that was a pretty good achievement. Even 1 kid, you know, is great. A life, you know, recharged, you know.
That's another funny Eric Stewart story, because he was saying when he crashed his Ferrari, what happened was he was in a coma. He nearly died. He was walking towards the light. No idea where he is. He doesn't know what's going on. Very comfortable walking towards the light. And the nurse started poking me. I didn't know who she
Snap
was.
back.
And no. What actually, she put the phone in his hand and some guy's going, "Paul, Eric, it's Paul.
Oh,
It's
so
Paul."
he was on his way out.
Yeah, well, it was actually Paul on the phone to him, and he said what happened was eventually he was going, "It's me, it's Paul McCartney," and he said, I started to waking up. I woke up, and that was that. And he said he made me turn all the cameras back on. Said, "I've got to tell you the story," and he says it's freaky
Great,
when you
yeah.
think about it, isn't it?
And I think that light at the end of the tunnel is an oncoming train, personally. You know.
Yeah, I think anyone who's turned an analog radio off for listening to the signal die out, that's breaking up. That's what that is. Yeah. No, so but apart from waking someone out of a coma, what are your influences on people? Is it the music? Is it the lifestyle? Is it the attitude? The attitude is.
The attitude is probably more than the music.
What is your attitude?
Fuck them if they can't take a joke, basically. You know, fuck them if they can take a joke, just in case. You know. But like it's you have to be like that, you know, because if you act nice to people, they just think you're weak, you know, a lot of the time. So you have to strong it a bit, you know. But having said that, we've got away with most of the things we ever did and made people understand, you know, at least, you know, I think because when we first walk in the room, they're terrified, you know. And then we, like, as soon as we're nice to them, they think, "Oh, thank God for that." And then they do what you want, you know.
I think, though, if you trace it back to the Beatles again, there's you see, say, John Lennon being sarky on TV, you know, when they're young, and then maybe that changed things. So 10 years later, you've got a very, very different youth culture. You know, people took that on board, didn't they? And it's a very different youth culture.
Yeah. I mean, the Beatles changed everything. You know, they changed the world. You know, I mean, they helped to stop the war in Vietnam. Like we did that, all us kids. You know, lining up and outside the American embassy and screaming all over the States, and like they more or less had a revolution in America because of the Vietnam War, and that's why it ended. You know, because it took all the guts out of the American side. You know, because they were over there listening to boom boxes, you know, with rock and roll on it, and they thinking, "What the fuck am I doing in this jungle listening to this wonderful music? I should be home listening to it." Right? I think the music dissuaded a lot of people from being gung ho, you know.
Yeah, Mary Quant said when we interviewed her that I thought it was an interesting point that you had to be there, even though she was famous before the Beatles. It was really dull before that,
Yeah.
and then suddenly it's all lively, and that opens up the door for everyone. And because they were creative and intelligent,
Swinging London.
yeah, but not just that, the attitudes and everything, because they were cultured and were curious about stuff, and were experimental, and it was a big part of things. So in a way, all modern people are descended.
Yeah, it lasted about 10 years, that party. It was pretty good, you know. And of course, in those days we did different drugs, kind of, These days it's all heroin and downers and shit, I mean, I lost count of the people that say, have you got any, and they know all the downers by heart, I don't understand downers myself,
No, I've never understood that either. No.
I always wanted to be there,
A heightened sense of being there,
and you sort of become prey when you're on downers or heroin, you lay down in the gutter, you prey, right? I always fancy being a predator much more than I fancy being prey.
Well, even George Harrison said, didn't he, that he felt guilty for every drug casualty on the West Coast.
Really?
Yeah, he said that they were the first people to say it out loud, weren't they? And say it in, so then they become exemplars and kind of icons of drug taking.
Even McCartney.
Even McCartney.
I took LSD, says Paul.
Twice, probably, yeah.
Poor devil, yeah. Well, they got spiked with it first, didn't they? I mean, the George's dentist, wasn't it? Spiked him with it at a dinner he threw for him. They all went round there.
Right.
Then they all got in a mini and got lost on acid in London. That must have been funny. I'd love to have been a fly on the upholstery the day that one happened.
I'd just like to see 4 people in a mini.
Yeah, I think there was more than 4 because 2 of them had their girlfriends with them, didn't they?
So have you ever looked at those ideas like determinism and fatalism, and that things are connected and they're always connected, the 6 degrees of separation idea? Do you buy that because this happened, that happens?
Well, yeah, it's obvious to a point. But I think also a lot of things would have happened anyway. Might have been a slightly different form, but all the things that really matter would have happened, I think. I mean, the women's movement wasn't just because of the Beatles, we all know that, right? And it started in America. The Beatles were never an American band, Even though, see, there's another thing you'll never see again. You'll never see a band with the top 8 places in the charts, will you?
When people actually bought records.
Yeah, right.
But the 6 degrees of separation thing is interesting. So Nancy Sinatra said that she came to London just to meet the Beatles.
Yeah.
But then
she's Frank Sinatra's daughter. I mean, how big is that?
Yeah. But then she went to Mary Quant and she bought some clothes and a miniskirt and boots.
And a pair of Mary Quant boots too, them white boots.
That's right. And then within a few months, everyone was wearing them in America. Yeah. And I thought, well, that's just someone mythologizing. But then when I spoke to Mary Quant and she said that's exactly what happened. And it was a nightmare because we were running a small shop in Chelsea and then suddenly we had to step up to cater for America, So in fact, what happens is that
cross-pollination,
Yeah, but it's nothing to do with it. But if she hadn't have been, she wouldn't have been there to do the cross-pollination without the Beatles. So you end up all these side effects.
Well, there's Granny Takes a Trip and on the King's Road and that other place as well. I forget what it was called, but I'm still wearing trousers made to that pattern, Sterling Cooper, right? I'm still wearing them now. It's a great pattern, and I never changed from it.
Mm. So you think some things would have happened anyway. So I'm really interested in what were the big impacts the Beatles had. Could you describe for me what you think the world might have looked like if they hadn't been there, maybe?
Well, if they hadn't been there, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, it would be a lot duller, wouldn't it? I mean, the music would have suffered. But you see, you don't know, maybe a band would have come out which would have not done that music, but approximated the amount of excitement, like the punk thing was almost that exciting, when it happened. But it didn't last very long, before they were seen to have feet of clay, I mean, the Beatles never had feet of clay right till now. People still respect the Beatles as musicians and as people, which is a pretty good achievement.
Well, I wonder, because of the environment that punk happened in,
well, it was very negative,
Yeah, but I think what I mean is that the culture that the punks existed in was a culture in which people were already playing and writing their own songs and doing stuff. That was more commonplace. So, after 63, guitar sales went through the roof, 600% something. So culturally, we've changed, and there's music and bands and things like that in a more commonplace way. Ian Brody said that, and he puts that on the Beatles. Because of the Beatles, you were singer-songwriters,
you
were in
could
bands.
Go and do it. But the punk was the first thing that ushered people into bands who couldn't actually play. That's the main achievement of punk, And they had to learn pretty quick, I suppose, because they expect you to be able to play eventually in a band, you know. But I mean, the Beatles were always really good musicians too. I mean, George, you know, doing that solo Until There Was You, you know, it's unbelievable. You know, it's so good. And he had nobody to listen to learn that.
Yeah, yeah. I'll tell you the good one that I had to learn off a transcription, unfortunately, is All My Love It, the guitar solo in that.
Oh yeah,
An awesome solo. And
it's
he
a
was,
really
what, 20?
country
Yeah,
picking thing.
country one, yeah. And he's only 20 or something.
Yeah, I
right?
know. Well, yeah, I mean, yesterday, you know, Jesus, that's ridiculous. You know, day in the life, you know.
Yeah, I think a lot of people say the same thing, but I think there's something weird about that music. Glenn Ballard, the producer, you know, of Alanis Morissette, things like that, he was saying the thing that gets most often overlooked is the groove. That they were a great groove band. So Paul and Ringo,
Yeah,
drum and
they were
bass, as
great.
I call them, they really locked, and they had a really interesting.
Well, Ringo
radical...
is always like put down as a bad drummer. I can't understand it, because if you listen to Ticket to Ride, you know, I mean, that's out of nowhere. That's out of left field altogether. And I thought he was really good. You know, I always thought he was good right from day one. And that shuffle thing on the hi-hats has still not been bettered for keeping the thing going, you know, for filling in, you know, that's a great thing. I just thought he was great all the time. And the last chorus of She Loves You, and it's all tom rolls, you know. I think he's incredible, you know, and he never gets any credit.
Well, he does from me. I think he's amazing. When I was learning to play drums, I was trying to learn stuff, and I thought it was really hard. She Loves You is a good example.
Do you think this is simple, don't you?
You think it's
Yeah.
simple, but can you think of another record that starts? Brrr?
Yeah.
You just don't, do you?
No,
That's rare.
That's not one of the things that you learn, you know, except if you learn it off somebody like Ringo. You know, you never learn it off a drummer doing drum school, right? You'll never learn to do that jang at the front of Hard Day's Night, you know. And we spent months trying to figure that out, and it was just an open chord, you know.
What do you think about what happened to them after they split up? One of the most obvious consequences of the Beatles existing is, if they hadn't have existed, John would probably still be alive, wouldn't he?
Yeah. Oh, you don't know what would have happened, you know. I mean, there's always that lunatic fringe among fans, especially of a band that big, you know, that meant that much, as we said, to so many people. There's bound to be a few negative spots, you know, out there. And Dimebag Darrell, you know, that's another one that got through the net and got to him, you know. And Lennon was just unfortunate, you know. He just happened to be in the wrong place at the right time, you know.
Yeah, when I was working for Apple, I remember talking to someone there, and they were saying when George was attacked in his home, that was terrible. But they had to hide a lot of that for the time. But it was very severe, and he was stabbed
That's really
quite a lot.
traumatic, yeah.
But he was inches away
Yeah.
from death. But this is weird, isn't it? Because this is a band that was about love. They're about peace. You know, George complained about being a Beatle and said, but it's not really given to many people, is it, to make hundreds of millions of people happy?
Put smiles on that many faces it's a great thing, you know.
But we're back to the influence thing again. Is it possible to take on the fact that when you do music, that when you perform, you're making people happy? Does that figure at all?
Yeah, I like that. But we don't play for people, we play for ourselves. We put an album out that we're proud of, because you can't try and please people because you don't know what they want, you know. You can't go and have a poll, you know, which is favourite these days, isn't it? Have a bloody poll, or a meeting, you know, a committee meeting with all these other bozos from the music business who also don't know what the kids want. You know, what the kids want, the kids decide. And it's impulsive and spontaneous, you know, they decide what they want at the moment. They don't think about it beforehand at all. They got no plan to like this kind of music. This music is played by one lot of guys, and all these other guys go, yeah, you know. It's like Townsend said, you know, make a big enough show on stage and you'll go down all right, you know. What was it he said? He said, well, my band has no musical integrity whatsoever. He said, we're just a big flash thing on stage, and 500 geezers go, you know.
So has anyone ever come up to you and said, look, because you did this, I did this?
People said they didn't commit suicide because our music got them through a suicidal period. I think that's great, you know. And but like I got a letter from the skeezer once who said, I'm a member of the White Power organization in Louisiana, and I listened to your lyrics, and you obviously believe the same things, you know. And I thought, well, how can I have missed by that much with this person? How could it be? That just proves you can read into lyrics anything you want. It's like the Bible, you know. You can make it say anything you like if you take a line out of context, you know. So that was unfortunate.
The Beatles' great tragedy is the White Album being used and excused by Charles Manson, isn't it?
Yeah, well, that didn't do him any good, but it didn't do him that much harm, really. I mean, they were so monolithic, you know, by then. It didn't matter that one guy got it wrong. You know, 10 million other people got it right, you know.
Do you think the Beatles' success is in any way due to the fact that the media was very different then? They got a very easy ride, didn't they? They were all taking drugs. They did the 4 groupies a night. Really terrible stuff. But they got away with everything apart from once John became political and started doing Jesus comments and sitting in a bag, you know. But they actually, the easiest ride of...
John said he had film of himself being escorted out of brothels in like Holland by the police, you know, like put in the car, you know, crawling on his hands and knees, cataclysmically wrecked, you know. And the police would escort him to a car. But then that backlashed on him. And then Yoko got busted, George got busted, you know. There's a lot of that, let's bust the Beatles. What was it? Inspector Pilcher of the Yard, you know, running upstairs going, which one's Eric Clapton, you know. There's a great fashion of that. And then the bastard got busted for taking a lot of the drug money, busted and running off to Australia with it.
So when all that happened at the time, you know, how did that impact on young people on the underground and...
Well, the Beatles were underground to a large extent all through their career, you know.
I was talking to my mum and she said, you know, people didn't talk about drugs and stuff. But then the Beatles are being arrested. Did that change the conversation? It's hard to remember now, isn't it? I'd love to know, you know, did ordinary kids start talking about drugs? Did they talk about the Beatles being busted? Did people start talking about it in the mainstream? You know, obviously things are very different now, but how shocking was it?
Well, we just thought it was unjust, you know, and it was, you know. And the Stones got busted around the same time, Keith at Redlands and Jagger, you know. And when they gave them, 5 years each, wasn't it? They gave them. I mean, what the fuck is that for a joint? You know, you think that's a little extreme, man? And all those people took that ad out in the Times, who breaks a butterfly on a wheel, you know, all these like highbrow people and like influential lords and poets and, you know, musicians. I mean, classical musicians too, all signed, you know, petition on the page. It was a great thing that, you know.
We have to wrap up, unfortunately, being stared at. But final question, you know, if you had to summarize it, what would you say the Beatles' really big contribution to the world was? Imagine, you know, without the Beatles, what was the big contribution?
They made a lot more people play music, for sure. And they gave people the confidence to do so, to come out of wherever they were. You can do this if you work in a factory. You can leave and do music and make it. And a lot of people did, you know. And a lot of people fell by the wayside, but a lot of people really did make the next generation of great music, you know. So I would say without the Beatles, you would never have had any of the bands that have hit it big since, you know, because they're all, one way or another, modelled on the Beatles, you know. I think that any band who does close harmony singing owes it to the Beatles. I think any band who has 3 singers in the front line owes it to the Beatles, you know, because you would never have thought of that without them. It would never been done before.
Such a character. Do you know, my cousin James lives in LA, and he worked with Filthy Animal, the drummer. So Filthy had kind of retired. So my cousin James, he's got this band using the stuff they did with Filthy called Little Villains, very Motorheady. Filthy introduced him to Lemmy, so he took him over to his flat in LA. He had this mad collection of World War II Nazi memorabilia.
Yeah. He was quite open about that, wasn't he? You know.
He was open about that, but did you see what he said about white power people? You know, he goes, "What have I done wrong for people to think that I'm into that?"
Yeah,
because
he might be collecting Nazi memorabilia. Might be one of the clues.
Lemmy was part of that generation. He's the easy rider end of the 60s, isn't he? You know? And that's a very liberal end.
Yeah, and there was that sort of the next generation people wearing iron crosses and stuff was kind of how can I most upset my parents' generation, and it's like kick against the one thing that no one would argue against. You know?
Well, my cousin James wears one for his desert rock band. I mean, he's as liberal as they come, yeah, but it's part of his iconography for his band. How did you react to that stuff about Motorhead saving people's lives?
He was quite prosaic about it, you know, you have to do like 5 a month and then eventually one comes good and stuff. But he was actually genuinely quite moved in the fact that he'd sort of touched someone's life, and you know, that bringing someone out of a coma because of your music, isn't that like what amazing? We talk about the magic of the Beatles, that's like the magic of music, isn't it? You know, you can cut through to people.
So you have all these unintended consequences, and a lot of these are really weird because of the power of celebrity, you know.
I think if I heard Lemmy's voice, it would bring me out of a coma anyway.
I think it would.
It's like pulling you out of a coma.
Do you think Kim Kardashian's brought anyone back from the dead?
I don't know. I don't think it would bring me back.
Yeah.
But, you know, Taylor Swift, I'm sure she feels.
I'll bet Taylor Swift can bring people back from, you know, a coma.
Yeah. I don't know how you test that.
Has she sent anyone into a coma? I actually like Taylor Swift. I'm a Swiftie.
I think, yeah, me too.
So I don't want to.
Yeah.
I'm not.
Yeah,
I
no,
don't want to go down the JD Vance route of dissing Taylor.
Definitely.
Sorry.
More for Swifties.
He was interesting. I'll tell you one of the things that happened afterwards. Again, it's not on camera. You can see there's a guitar in the background. I took this Epiphone along, a kind of copy of a John Lennon acoustic, and got people to sign it. But it did mean it was there also to be played.
Yeah.
So as soon as we finished filming, Lemmy picks up the guitar and he was saying to me, that Paul McCartney, man, the best melodicist, he's just genius and everything. Picks up and it's not a Paul song, it's a John song, but Paul's got the high line on it of If I Fell from Hard Day's Night. And he literally started singing, literally like I'm about to now. If I give my... You know, I was going, what? Can we turn the camera back on? Get that. He goes, fuck off, you cunt. Really? It's not the first time a pop star told me to fuck off. But it was like, you know, obviously we've got to protect his reputation.
Yeah.
I think he'd been okay singing Hell Skelter.
Yeah.
Like,
That's the thing, it's like that sort of Lemmy persona, and it, you know, it obviously is an act because he's performing, but I just love the fact that he kind of opened up there and he just sort of said exactly what he felt about things, you know, obviously not as far as singing If I Fell on camera, but, you know, he's so unashamedly a Beatles fan, which is amazing.
Yeah. That's episode 1. But, you know, look, we're a podcast, so we have to do the obligatory. Please do subscribe. So we've got a YouTube channel where we're going to do some little video excerpts. Because these were shot for a TV documentary, you'll have seen us talk about that in episode 1. We're not in them. It's limited use on YouTube, if you know what I mean. So we've just got small clips up. But if you do want to just watch the unedited interview with Lemmy, you can subscribe to Patreon and it's there. I think it's only about 15 minutes longer, so it's not a huge amount. Some of them are an hour longer. It's definitely worth overall, and it will help us keep going. We've both got day jobs, so we're just about able to scrape through doing it off our own backs. But the idea is that we would love to build a bit of a community, get out to LA again. I've got some people out there that are amazing. I'm not going to, what's the word, jinx it by saying who. So if you can support us, that would be great.
Yeah, and so any money that we get through that will go straight back into the show and like help to get us out there and speak to some exciting people can't tell you about yet at the moment.
Don't want to be done under trade description when Meryl Streep can't suddenly do it, you know. And Meryl, if you're watching. Next episode is on October the 1st.
So the first we've got Terry Gilliam coming up, and who else have we got?
Lol Cream.
Yeah, 10cc.
So I really recommend those. I thought Lemmy was great, but Lol Cream, I couldn't stop laughing all the way through the interview. He's this crazy man. And he tells you all these fantastic stories because he's not just 10cc, he's not just Godley and Cream. Godley and Cream were not just pop stars, they were also literally at the forefront of 80s videos and promos and the birth of MTV. They literally helped form MTV. They were consultants on MTV as well as making videos for MTV. And he's got these great stories that cover being inspired by the Beatles, working with different Beatles, and also the crazy times of making videos in the 80s. So I really recommend that one if you get a chance. I think that's it for this week, isn't it?
I think it is, yeah.
Yeah. Next episode's on October the 1st, and after that, 1st of every month. This has been Without the Beatles. I'm Des Birkinshaw.
I'm Mark Cooper.